And now it's time for another Board Game Brawl Top 10 with Nick Meanahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and it is time for another Edge of Your Seat Thrill a Minute Top 10 list. For the third year in a row, it is my top 10 anticipated games of Gen Con. In fact, my very first top 10 list on this channel was for my top 10 games of 2013 Gen Con, just a couple of weeks after I started my channel, and here we are today. If you're not familiar with Gen Con, it is the biggest tabletop gaming convention in North America, and it is neck and neck for the biggest gaming convention worldwide, well, tabletop gaming convention worldwide, with Essenspiel. I think they're really neck and neck at this point. Essentially what it is, it's just a huge convention people go to have tabletop gaming events where usually role-playing games, but also Magic the Gathering, board games are getting a huge presence there nowadays. And it's also where publishers release many of their newest, hottest games for the year for you to actually purchase or to at least demo. And if I might rant for just a second before we get to the actual list, I'm just not sure why that is. Maybe as the years go by and I'm getting more and more into board games, I'm starting to become a little more jaded and cynical. I just don't understand why the publishers have a vested interest in all of them coming together and having Gen Con be the dumping point for this. I know why Gen Con, the committee, wants them to do that, because they want to make their convention in this big, huge, monstrous place for people to do all of their business. And I know why most other board gaming media personalities want that to be the case, because most other people in board gaming media, aside from myself, I guess, and maybe you can say this is sour grapes, I don't know, but they fixate on these conventions and they like make their whole tableau of whatever it is, articles, videos, podcasts for the year, they center them around these conventions. So they have a vested interest in keeping it this way too, but I don't know what's in it for the publishers. If you compare it to the video game industry, all year long you can buy video games. New games come out all the time, every month. Sometimes they cluster around the holidays, but even then you can buy them all across the country, at different stores, online. You don't have to go to a convention to pick them up. It just seems odd to me. And of course, Essenspiel is also guilty of this as well. It actually makes me think that maybe I'll like the Origins fair better, because not a lot of games debut at Origins. It's just about gaming. And that's why I like the Dice Tower Con as well. It's just about gaming. But I digress. I don't want to be too cynical. I do enjoy the fact that I get to make lists like this where there's like talk about these really new hot games coming out. It's just weird that they're all coming out at the same time in the same place. Okay, but moving on, I have to say that this year seemed a little bit lackluster for my anticipated games. That's not to say that I didn't have a lot of options. I probably had like 20 to 25 games or expansions to games that I could have put on this list, but nothing was like, wow, it's amazing. I mean, a couple of them were, obviously, like my number 1, number 2, number 3, but not like last year. Last year spoiled me and a lot of other people as well. There were so many AAA rank S titles at Gen Con last year. It was just incredible. I mean, my whole top like 20 from last year could be like a lot of people's top 20 games of all time. That's how good the stuff was coming out of Gen Con last year. I just don't get that feeling this year, and this seems to be mostly expansions is what I was getting excited about, and I think a lot of other people are feeling the same way. Now, one of the things that I like to do whenever I do an iterative top 10 list is to look at the previous year's entries and see how things have gone over the past year with me and those games in particular. So let's take a look at last year's list. Number 10 on the 2014 Gen Con anticipated list for me was the Witcher adventure game, total dud. I'm doing the David Letterman thing. I never even bothered to buy it myself. I played someone else's copy, never even reviewed it. It was just a dull, flat, mediocre experience. It wasn't even so bad that it was interesting. It was just mediocre, which is a shame because it looked good and it was a waste of an awesome theme. Number 9 was Shadowrun Crossfire. Now that is an excellent game that is over there on my shelf somewhere. It's still in my collection. I love it, but it has been left to die, I think, by Catalyst Game Labs. I'm not sure why they haven't been pumping out more stuff from it. They had a lot of goodwill in the beginning. They should have really rode that wave. And I should be talking about a brand new expansion coming out at Gen Con this year, but I'm not. I don't think they have anything major planned. That's sad. Number 8 was King of New York, probably the first hot Gen Con game I was able to play and review, thanks to a friend of mine who picked it up for me. It's great. I think it improves on King of Tokyo. It's a bit more complicated, a bit more fiddly, but it looks better. It's got it's more thematic than King of Tokyo was, I think. Just a solid game, and I'm still waiting for an expansion for that as well. Then we have Legendary Encounters, an alien deck building game at number 7. Incredible game. I still like the original Legendary more just because there's more stuff for it. It's a little more accessible. The theme is a little bit better for me personally, superheroes. But Legendary Encounters, Alien, fantastic thematic game. Really difficult, pure co-op, which does give it a leg up, at least in that regard, over the original Legendary. And it just looks fantastic. Really great game. And maybe there's another Legendary Encounters game I'll be talking about in a little bit. Spoilers. Number 6 of last year was Trains Rising Sun, which is a fantastic expansion to a fantastic game. It's a standalone set for Trains, but I have to say I got so burned out on playing Trains so much that I haven't really touched either set in the past year too much. But still, it doesn't really mean anything. It just means I have too many games and not enough time. It's still a solid game. My number 5 was Argent the Consortium, and that was a huge lie last year. I'm not even sure that was being demoed last year. I don't know what I was thinking because it didn't get into Kickstarter backers' hands until like February or March of this year, and then it hit retail soon after that. But regardless, it's a really good game. It's overwhelming. There's a ton of stuff, and it's fiddly and long, but it looks great, and it's just a very thematic, cool worker placement game. Number 4 was Samurai Spirit last year from Antoine Balza, one of my favorite designers. I have to say, I only played this one time, someone else's copy, and it was just okay. I do want to play it again someday, but I was really underwhelmed. It was just a card stacking game, essentially, trying to stack up cards in your own tableau to a certain number, and they have really great, like, Samurai 7 type art, but other than that, it was pretty abstract. But I do want to try it again. Number 3 was the Battle at Kemble's Cascade. That was a super innovative, based on retro shoot-'em-up video games. It looked fantastic. Like I said, it was very unique. Loved the theme. It was just turned out to be a decent game, not overwhelmingly good, so it didn't stay in my collection. I'm starting to pare down my collection quite a bit. But still great. I still recommend it, and I'd like to see what they do with an expansion, actually. Now we're getting to the really good stuff. My number 2 last year was Abyss. I still have Abyss. It is right behind me there. Wonderful game. Fantastic artwork. That's the first thing everyone noticed about it. And people were a little surprised when the actual game itself was pretty simple. I mean, I would call it a gateway game. It actually has served that purpose in my group quite a few times. It's wonderful. They announced a big expansion, and I can't wait for it. And finally, my number 1 last year was Lords of Zidit from Asmodee. Lords of Zidit, based in the Seasons universe, looks wonderful. The artwork is fantastic. The components, the actual physical bits, are also wonderful. And it is just a really cool programming game. A genre I don't typically like, but Lords of Zidit worked, especially because the endgame scoring was really trippy and unique. Loved it. That's another game, though, that seems to have been left to die by its parent company. No expansion has been announced. I mean, it was originally just a re-implementation of Himalaya anyways. Maybe they never intended to have any expansions, but I really wish that they would. I don't know if people just forgot about this game, but it is still wonderful. I don't know if it would have still made my number 1 of last year. Knowing what I know now, Abyss might actually have unseated it, but still fantastic. Oh, by the way, Dead of Winter didn't make my list last year just because I'd already played it, reviewed it, play tested it many times before I did my list for Gen Con last year. That's the only reason, in case you didn't catch last year's list in my explanation then. Anyways, let's move on to this year's list. The only 2 notable omissions are Mysterium and Awakan, otherwise now known as Code of 9. The reason being that I've already played and reviewed both of those games. There are new additions coming out at the Gen Con, but they're not that different. Mysterium got some artwork facelift and also some new components, but otherwise it's still the same game. Check out my reviews if you really want to know more about them. Without further ado, I know this was a really long intro. Let's get to my top 10 anticipated games of Gen Con 2015. My number 10 was an 11th hour entry. Actually, Eric Martin just broke the news that this would be for sale at the con today, and it bumped off my original number 10. That is Wrath of Dragons from Catalyst Game Labs. In this game, each player takes control of a dragon, an actual dragon. You're not just controlling them, or you're not like a summoner or anything like that. You and the other dragons are competing to destroy the world, essentially. You're playing the game over centuries. Each round represents a century thematically. You're trying to destroy all these villages and the peasants and the commoners and knights. Whoever can do that the best to get the most points is going to be the winner. The one bummer about this game is that there's no cool plastic miniatures. This is not going to be a Kickstarter game. They have dragon meeples, which do look cool, but leave a little bit to be desired. But otherwise, I love the theme. It seems incredibly interesting. The artwork is fantastic for the individual dragons in the box art. Just really excited for this one. Came out of nowhere. That is Wrath of Dragons from Catalyst Game Labs. For my number 9, I cheated a little bit because I was actually able to play a prototype version of this at Dice Tower Con. It is Codenames from CGE, otherwise known as Czech Games Edition, and the designer Vlada Chvátil, who I'm not a big fan of a lot of Vlada's games, but I will say what I like about him is that every game that he does is different and unique, and Codenames, even amongst his own games, but outside of that, is a unique game. This is a team-based, I guess you'd call it a party game. There's a bunch of different tiles out on in the table, in the middle of the table, that have these different random words on them. And each team of players is going to have one person whose sole job is to give clues about the tile out on the table based on a grid that only they can see, and they need to make sure that, it's tough to explain this game, you need to make sure that their teammates guess the right tiles that line up with the secret grid that you have. I don't really know what this is supposed to represent thematically. I only know that it was very, very fun, and I can't wait to see the final version. It's just to give you an example of what's going to go on. You might be like, okay, I need to get them to guess these 3 tiles. So I need to be able to give them a clue without saying outright what it is, because that's against the rules, that is going to let them know what I'm linking together. And so it might be like, okay, there's like a few insects out here, or like a worm, and there's a bug, and there's like a politician is another one of the tiles. So I might say the word slimy, and that might get them to guess those tiles, but if they guess incorrectly, they could give the point to the other player. So super, super cool game, very unique. That is Codenames from CGE. My number 8 is an expansion for one of my top 100 games of all time, and that is Takenoko. This is the Takenoko Chibis expansion that introduces a female panda and baby pandas, and it is adorable. If you're not familiar with Takenoko, it's a very, well, I don't want to say it's really simple, but I'd say it's a light tile laying and bamboo placing game about trying to get the most points by manipulating a gardener and a panda in this bamboo garden. And this game introduces the female panda, and you have these tiles representing the baby pandas that each have a different effect. There's new tiles, there's new plot cards. It looks awesome. I'm sorry, I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. The only bummer is that I have back here somewhere the collector's edition of Takenoko, and this set that's coming out is exclusively for the regular edition of the game, with maybe a collector's set coming later on. So I have to have one of my friends lend me their retail, or not retail, but their normal copy of the game just to play it and try it out. But still, very, very excited for this one. Took me by surprise. It is Takenoko Chibis from Asmodee and Bombix. I also cheated on my number 7. I played a full-fledged version of this game at Dice Tower Con, and I loved it. It is Tides of Time from Portal Games. Unlike a lot of the other stuff that Portal has done, this is a very small, very light, it's basically a micro game. There's not many cards in the game. There's like 15 cards or something like that, 15 to 20. It's 2-player only. You and the other player are drafting these cards back and forth, trying to build, trying to get points by matching up different symbols. The cards have symbols that are going to be kicked off by the special abilities of other cards, and learning which cards to draft, which ones to let your opponent potentially have, is a lot of what is interesting and unique about this game, but also the fact that you get to like save a card permanently between each round, and also take a card permanently out of circulation. So even though there's a very small amount of cards, there's a lot of game in that very small box. Don't really care what the very abstract theme is supposed to be. It's just a solid game, and I look forward to getting my own copy of it. That is Tides of Time from Portal Games, my number 7. I alluded to my number 6 earlier on in this video, and that is Legendary Encounters, a Predator deck building game from Upper Deck. And the only reason why this is not farther up on my list, considering the fact that the first Legendary Encounters, the Alien game, was so amazing, was only because I like the Predator quite a bit less than both Alien and Marvel. I never really thought it would make a great deck building game, but again, based on the pedigree, based on how the original Encounters was, and the amazing artwork in this game, and the theme, and how, from what I understand, there's several different modes of play that you can play this deck builder in. You can do it in sort of the traditional Encounters mode or Legendary mode, but where you're working cooperatively together. You can do it Predators versus Humans, Humans versus Predators. I think there might be like a team aspect at some point. I mean, there's so much stuff packed into this box, way more than I imagined that they could milk out of the Predator franchise. I've seen photos of what the cards look like. It is fantastic looking, and I can't wait to give it a shot. That is Legendary Encounters, a Predator deck building game from Upper Deck. My number 5 is a standalone expansion for a game that I may be the only major reviewer, if I may be so bold, who actually enjoys this game greatly and has stuck with it since its debut at Gen Con a couple of years ago. That is High Command Rapid Engagement. This is based in the War Machine and Hordes universe of Privateer Press, originally a miniatures game, now a deck building game. And this set, Rapid Engagement, it looks like it's a 2-player only set. One player is Kador, the other player is Circle Ouroboros, which is one of the Hordes factions, which is like elves who summon magical beasts, werewolves and things like that. And you go at it and you're in the typical style of High Command. It looks great. I'm wondering what tweaks they've made to the system to make it more engaging for 2 players, which is not one of the best ways to play the original High Command. But I love having more High Command stuff. I'm excited to see what they can do, making it into a 2-player only game. And hopefully this will be a good starting on, or a good jumping on point for a lot of people to get into this excellent game, which has been criminally ignored. When I was playing that pretty mediocre game Barbarossa a few weeks ago, I was like, man, High Command does everything that this game does 10 times better. I really want to play High Command now, and I still want to this day. That is High Command Rapid Engagement from Privateer Press. Just by random chance, my number 4 is also from Privateer Press, and it's also set in the War Machine Hordes universe of the Iron Kingdoms. This one is called the Undercity, and this is a completely different game than High Command, actually. This one is a fully cooperative dungeon crawling game that takes place in the Undercity area of the Iron Kingdoms. I think it's called the Undercity of Corvus. You and the other players are trying to go through different campaign mode adventures. Now, I wasn't sure that I needed another campaign style game since they're so hard to get played in my group, but this one looks phenomenal. There's been a lot of complaints about the board, which I kind of agree with, but the miniatures look fantastic. The premise is awesome. I love the fact that it is fully cooperative and does not require a game master or an overlord or anything like that, like Descent. And this is another game that kind of came out of nowhere, but I am super excited for it. And as far as I'm concerned, Privateer Press's board games have been solid so far. They haven't always been like the greatest thing ever, but sometimes they kind of are, like with Level 7 Omega Protocol, and I do love High Command, so I think that they are starting to become, or maybe already are, a board gaming company to be reckoned with, not just a miniatures company. That is Privateer Press's The Undercity. Check it out, or I hope I can check it out, whatever. Now, my number 3 is a bit of a sore spot for me, I'm not going to lie, but it would have been wrong for me to not include it on the list, and definitely it deserves to be this high up. It is Blood Rage from Cool Mini or Not, and I say that this is a sore spot, and that's because I'm a backer of this game, and they are going to be releasing a limited quantity of the game at Gen Con way before any of the backers actually receive their copies in the mail. And I know that I shouldn't care about that much, and I'm willing to have people down in the comments bitch at me about it, but I still feel like that's the wrong thing to do, and I don't know why they would even bother to only sell a couple hundred copies. What big deal is it going to make? Wouldn't it be worth it to not piss off your Kickstarter backers for that small an amount? In any case, the game looks incredible. Putting aside any kind of controversy like that, this game, is from Eric Lang, and Eric Lang is an amazing designer, possibly my favorite designer out there right now, definitely in my top 5. It looks fantastic. The miniatures from Cool Mini or Not, you cannot complain about. They are unimpeachable. The gameplay looks innovative and engaging, lots of player interaction. One of my regrets of Dice Tower Con is that I was not able to play a demo copy of the game with the designer, but still, looks great. I wish that I was getting my copy before Gen Con, but c'est la vie. I'll still try it eventually. That is Blood Rage from Cool Mini or Not, my number 3. My number 2 anticipated game of Gen Con 2015 is another expansion, and this time it is to one of my top 10 favorite games of all time, Imperial Settlers from Portal Games. This is the Atlanteans expansion. It's a big box expansion which, among other things like new cards for the decks, it introduces a brand new faction, the Atlanteans faction, which are a really innovative ability where they have to sync some of their building cards, and it just looks amazing. I mean, I love Imperial Settlers, so any expansion for that is going to be an instant buy for me. I love the artwork on this new set. The theme looks really cool. Just really excited to get my hands on this one. Portal Games really knocking it out of the park. That is the second game on my list so far from them, and I can't wait to play more. That is the Imperial Settlers Atlanteans expansion from Portal. And finally, my #1 most anticipated game of Gen Con 2015 is yet another expansion. This was definitely the year of the expansions for me, and this one I was like, really? Am I going to make this #1? But then I thought about the game itself and the content that was going to come in this box, and I said, absolutely, I want this thing right now. It is the Legendary Secret Wars expansion. Now, I've played a lot of smaller Legendary expansions in the past couple of years, and even a big box Villains expansion, and while those were all great to varying degrees, none of them really came close to how excited I was for the first big expansion for Legendary, Dark City, which had, I think, technically more cards than the base game. So many new heroes, so many new villains, so many new masterminds, and I'm getting that feeling again from Secret Wars. This is based off of the latest intertitle storyline going through the Marvel Universe. I don't know if it's still going on or if it's wrapping up, but just like all these shattered timelines and like different dimensions intersecting with one another, tons of crazy characters, Spider-Gwen. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff and time travel and things, and that is just like a perfect breeding ground for new and innovative cards for Legendary. And already some of the ones I've seen, blowing my mind. They have all kinds of cool ideas about there's like, I think there's like a 1 versus all mode in the game now. Maybe I might be mistaken on that, but there's different types of like shattered timelines and shattered dimension type game modes. It's amazing, and there's so many cards. And by the way, there's going to be 2 Secret Wars sets. That's how much content they have for this thing. I am super psyched for it. Legendary, I know that people, it's polarizing in some degrees. Some people just do not like the game. Some people don't like having to sort it out and how fiddly it is. I know that those are problems. I have gotten over it because the core gameplay and the amount of content they have just is amazing, and I can't wait for this one. That is the Secret Wars expansion for Marvel Legendary, a deck building game. My #1 most anticipated game of Gen Con 2015. Well, that's the list. I hope you found it fun and informative. One thing I forgot to mention at the front of the video was that I got a lot of the information for this list from Eric Martin's excellent preview list over on Board Game Geek that details every single game you can see at Gen Con, whether it's for sale or just demoing, Kickstarter prototypes, things like that. I'll have a link to that down in the description section under the video, and also a link to the companion list that is on Board Game Geek that details only the games that are for sale at Gen Con, because that's actually how I tried to format my top 10 list, was only games you could actually go there and purchase, because a lot of people just don't want to spend their time demoing games there, and I totally understand that. And I want to know what you guys and gals think. What games are you excited for at Gen Con? Were you impressed with the total list of games? Do you think this is going to be a good year? Do you think it's a subpar year like I kind of sort of do? Do you think a lot of the good stuff is going to be coming out at Essen instead? Are you excited for that? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Let's do it again next year. My name is Nick. This is Board Game Brawl. Take care.